I want to tell you about a woman I once heard about, from folks who remembered her. Her name was Martha Hill, and if you'd passed her on the street back in 1883, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. Most people didn't. That was the whole problem. You see, Martha was what polite society called stout, and what cruel tongues called worse. 37 years old, never married, and tired down to her bones from doors closing in her face before she could even knock proper. But sometimes, and I've lived long enough to know this is true, sometimes the good Lord puts one door at the end of a long, dusty road, and sometimes the person behind that door asks the only question that ever mattered. This is her story. It might just be a little bit yours, too. The paper stuffed inside Martha's left boot had worn through somewhere past the Miller place. Every pebble on that road felt like the earth itself had something against her. 4 ranches in 2 weeks. 4 different ways of saying the same thing. We need someone who can keep up. Position's been filled. My wife wouldn't feel comfortable. And her favorite, from old Hank Dawson, who at least had the decency to look embarrassed while he said it. You're a fine woman, Miss Hill. But the boys would talk. Let them talk. They'd been talking her whole life. She stopped at the crest of the hill, pressing her hand against the stitch in her side. The smell of sage and sun-baked dust filled her nose. And somewhere off in the distance, a meadowlark was carrying on like it didn't have a care in the world. The coal ranch spread out below a modest house with a wraparound porch, a barn that needed painting, and a kitchen garden gone wild with weeds. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the May warmth. Someone was home. Martha smoothed her faded calico dress, knowing it wouldn't help none. The fabric had been washed so many times it had gone from blue to something closer to dishwater gray. Her mother's voice, thin and sharp, even from the grave. At least try to be presentable. Lord knows you need all the help you can get. She pushed the voice away, took a breath that tasted like dust and dry grass, started down the hill. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, the leather strap that should have held it having rotted away seasons ago. The path to the house was overgrown, grass pushing up between wagon ruts that hadn't seen wheels in some time. Everything about the place spoke of a man keeping things running and nothing more. Survival, not living. Martha understood that kind of existence. A windmill creaked somewhere behind the barn, slow and mournful, like it was complaining about the work. The smell of horse and hay drifted on the breeze, familiar scents that reminded her of her father's feed store back in Pueblo, before the coughing sickness took him. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch, each one creaking under her weight. A man sat in a chair near the door, a bridle draped across his knees, his hands working a leather awl through a worn strap. He didn't look up. 40, maybe. Hard to tell with men like this. The sun aged them quick, and loneliness aged them quicker. Aged them. Dark hair shot through with gray at the temples. A face that might have been handsome once, before it learned to hold everything in. A tin cup sat on the porch rail beside him. The coffee in it long gone cold. She could smell it from where she stood, burnt and bitter. The kind of coffee a man makes when he's stopped caring how it tastes. Mr. Cole. That's right. Still not looking up. His hands kept moving, steady and sure, the waxed thread pulling through leather with a soft whisper. Martha had practiced her speech walking up the road, had said it so many times the words felt worn smooth as river stones. My name is Martha Hill. I'm seeking employment as a housekeeper. I'm hardworking, honest, and I don't require much in the way of compensation. Just room and board and a fair wage. She opened her mouth to deliver it. Ain't got time for a speech. His voice was flat. neither kind nor unkind, like a man stating the weather. He pulled the awl through the leather, examined the stitch, and finally looked up. Martha braced herself. This was always the moment. The quick glance down her body, the flash of something in their eyes, pity or disgust, or that particular look men got when they saw a woman who didn't fit the picture they carried in their heads. Then the excuses would start. Ethan Cole's eyes went to her hands first. She watched him study them, the rough knuckles, the calluses across her palms, the permanent stain of lye soap and garden soil that no amount of scrubbing could shift. Working hands, hands that had done their share and then some. Then he looked at her face, not down, not away, straight at her, the way you'd look at anyone who deserved the courtesy of being seen. What can you do? 3 words, no preamble, no performance, just a question that expected an honest answer. I cook, Martha said, her practiced speech forgotten. Good plain food, nothing fancy, but it sticks to your ribs. I keep books learned from my father. He ran a feed store in Pueblo before he passed. I clean, I mend, I can handle a kitchen garden. She paused, then added what she'd never said at the other places, because it hadn't seemed to matter. And I don't quit halfway through nothing, ever. Ethan Cole set down the bridle, picked up the tin cup and took a swallow of what had to be stone-cold coffee, his face showing nothing about how it must have tasted. His expression gave away not a single thing. $1 a week, plus room and board, he said. Rooms out back, supper's at 6. You late, you don't eat. Martha felt the ground shift under her feet. And it wasn't just the paper giving way in her boot. That's all you don't want to... She didn't know how to finish. Look me over proper. Ask why no one else would hire me. Make sure I understand my place. I asked what you could do. You told me. Either you were lying, in which case I'll know by tomorrow, or you weren't, in which case we got no problem. He picked up the bridle again, the leather creaking soft in his hands. Kitchen's through there. Stove probably needs blacking. Ain't had anyone tend to it proper in a while. He went back to his work, and Martha stood there on the creaking porch, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Go on then, Ethan said, without looking up. Daylight's wasting. The kitchen was a disaster. Martha stood in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness after the bright May afternoon. The smell hit her first old grease and dust, and something underneath that might have been mouse. Grease coated the stovetop in layers that spoke of months, maybe years, of neglect. Mouse droppings dotted the corners like dark seeds scattered by a careless hand. The single window was so filthy, it turned the sunlight brown, like looking through old tea. And yet, someone had kept the flour bin filled. The salt cellar sat full on its shelf. A ham hung in the pantry, alongside jars of preserves that had to be at least 2 years old. The handwritten labels faded but still legible in the dim light. Peach, 1881. Apple butter, 1881. A woman's handwriting? Careful, with little flourishes on the capital letters. The kind of penmanship they used to teach in schoolhouses, back when such things mattered. Martha opened the flour bin, checking for weevils. None. She found the bin of cornmeal, also clean. Someone was still buying supplies, still keeping the basics stocked, even if they'd given up on everything else. She rolled up her sleeves. By the time the light through the grimy window turned golden, Martha had scrubbed the stovetop down to bare iron, the muscles in her arms burning from the effort. She'd swept out the worst of the dirt, found a bucket and brush that looked like they hadn't been touched since those preserves were made. Her back ached, and her knees creaked when she stood, popping like green wood in a fire. But the kitchen was starting to look like a kitchen again. She found the ham in the pantry, along with a basket of eggs and some sad-looking potatoes that had begun to sprout eyes. Not much to work with, but she'd made meals from less and harder times. She was slicing the ham, the knife steady in her practiced hand, when she heard footsteps on the porch, heavy boots, a slight hesitation before the door opened. "Supper in 20 minutes," she said without turning around. "If you want to wash up." A pause. The creak of a floorboard. Then the footsteps retreated. 20 minutes later. Ethan Cole sat down at the kitchen table, also scrubbed clean for the first time in what looked like years, and looked at the plate she set before him. Ham. Fried with a little of the bacon grease she'd found in a tin by the stove, eggs cooked through the way men generally liked them, and potatoes crisped up golden in the pan. He didn't say grace out loud, but he closed his eyes for a moment, his lips moving just slightly, before picking up his fork. Martha had known men who prayed and men who didn't, and she'd learned not to make assumptions about either kind. She busied herself at the stove, not wanting to watch him eat, not wanting to seem like she was waiting for judgment. The fire crackled soft behind the iron door. Outside, a horse nickered in the barn, and that mournful windmill kept up its slow complaint. "Sit down." She turned to be... Ethan was looking at her. Fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I don't stand on ceremony," he said. "You eat when I eat, sitting down, like a person." Martha blinked. "Most folks prefer their help to, 'You ain't help, you're the housekeeper.'" He went back to his food, cutting the ham with the efficiency of a man who'd learned not to waste motion. "There's a difference. Now sit down before it gets cold." She sat. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, uncomfortable silence she'd expected. Ethan Cole didn't seem like a man who needed conversation to fill up space. He ate steadily, cleaned his plate, and pushed back from the table. "Better than mine," he said. Then he put his hat back on and walked out to the barn, the screen door slapping shut behind him. Martha sat alone in the kitchen she'd just scrubbed clean, in a house that wasn't hers, working for a man who'd hired her without once looking at her body like it was a problem to be solved. She didn't cry. She'd trained herself out of that years ago, back when tears had stopped doing any good. But she sat there for a long time, watching the light fade through the window that still needed cleaning, listening to the crickets starting up their evening song, and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not hope. Not yet. Just the quiet absence of shame. The room out back was barely bigger than a closet, a rope bed with a mattress stuffed with corn husks that rustled when she sat down. A washstand with a chipped pitcher and basin, a crack running through the porcelain like a lightning bolt frozen in place. One window, no curtain, letting in the last purple light of evening. A nail in the wall for hanging clothes. It was perfect. Martha set her carpet bag on the bed, the only thing she owned in the world, besides the dress she was wearing and the one folded inside. The leather handles were worn soft from years of carrying, the brass clasp tarnished to the color of old pennies. She opened it carefully, the hinges creaking in protest. Her mother's Bible. The cover cracked and soft from years of handling. The pages thin as onion skin. A tintype photograph in a small brass frame her parents on their wedding day. Her mother young and slender and unrecognizable as the bitter woman she'd become. And tucked at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, a dress of dark blue cotton that Martha had made herself 3 years ago and never worn. "What are you saving it for?" her mother had asked. Near the end, when the sickness had made her mean in ways she'd never been before. You think some man's going to come calling? Martha had never answered, had just folded the dress away and tended to her mother through the fever that finally took her. And then had packed up the little house and discovered that 37 years of living hadn't added up to much more than a single carpet bag. She set the Bible on the washstand, where she could reach it come morning. Hung her spare dress on the nail, the fabric swaying gentle in the breeze from the window. Stood in the middle of her tiny room and listened to the evening sounds through the thin walls. A horse, nickering soft in the barn. The creak of the windmill finally gone quiet. Somewhere far off a coyote starting up its lonesome song. Tomorrow she would finish cleaning the kitchen. Tackle those windows. See what could be done about that sorry excuse for a kitchen garden that had gone to weeds and wishes. Tonight, she would sleep in a bed she'd earned, in a room that was hers for as long as she could keep it. Martha Hill had been given exactly one chance in 37 years. She was not going to waste it. If you're watching tonight from somewhere that feels like home or somewhere you're still hoping to find, I'd be honored to hear where that is. After all, every good story is better when it's shared with folks who understand. The kitchen hadn't felt a woman's hand in a long time. Martha knew this the way she knew weather was coming when her knees ached by the evidence left behind. A hairbrush on the windowsill, bristles still holding strands of gray-brown hair, dried flowers in a cracked blue vase, petals turned to dust at the slightest breath, a woman's apron hanging on a nail by the pantry door, the fabric stiff with age. The ties faded from red to the color of old rust. She left those things where they were. Some belongings aren't meant to be moved by strangers. The stove needed more work than she'd realized. The grease had built up in layers. Each one a meal cooked without care. Without anyone to notice the spatter, Martha scraped and scrubbed until her shoulders burned like fire, until the black iron began to show its true color underneath. Behind the flour bin, her fingers touched paper. She pulled it out careful. A recipe card, the edges yellowed and soft. The handwriting the same careful script she'd seen on the preserve labels. Little flourishes on the capital letters, the kind of penmanship that spoke of patience and pride. Gingerbread Ethan's favorite. Extra molasses? She read it twice. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were clear as church bells. Someone had written this with love. Someone who wanted to remember exactly how to make something that mattered. Martha folded the card, slipped it into her apron pocket without knowing quite why. The back door creaked open. Boot steps on the wooden floor. Then silence. The smell of horse and leather and honest sweat drifted in with him. "Coffee's on," Martha said, not turning from the stove. "Biscuits be ready in 10 minutes. She heard him settle into a chair, the scrape of the coffee pot against the table. When she finally turned with the plate of biscuits, steam still rising from the golden tops, Ethan Cole was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He ate without speaking. Took a second biscuit, a third. The only sounds were the clink of his fork, the crackle of the stove, a blue jay fussing somewhere outside the window. "Better than mine," he said again. The same words as last night, but something different underneath. Softer, maybe, or just tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. The back door banged open. "Well, I'll be—" a voice like gravel rolling downhill. Somebody finally taught this kitchen some manners. The man in the doorway was old 70 if he was a day, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen too much sun and not enough easy living. He looked at Martha, then at Ethan, then back at Martha. Jesse Walker. He pulled off a hat that had seen better decades, the brim curled and stained with years of sweat. I work the cattle, such as they are. Martha Hill. I keep the house. Jesse's eyes traveled slow across the clean stove. The scrubbed table. The biscuits cooling on their plate. His nostrils flared, taking in the smell of fresh coffee and hot bread. Lord have mercy, he said quiet, almost to himself. Ain't smelled biscuits like that since Miss Catherine passed. Martha's hand drifted to her apron pocket, to the recipe card hidden there. Miss Catherine. Ethan's chair scraped back hard against the floor. He was already at the door, coffee abandoned. His face closed tight as a fist. Jesse, he said, and the single word carried enough warning to stop a stampede. But Martha had heard the name, had seen the way Ethan's shoulders had gone rigid at the sound of it, like a man bracing against a blow. Who was Catherine? And why did her name make this quiet man want to run? The wagon seat was hard beneath Martha's bones, every rut in the road jolting up through her spine. She gripped the edge of the seat, her knuckles white against the weathered wood. Cedar Hollow spread out ahead, a scatter of buildings along a single dusty street. The general store with its faded awning, a blacksmith shop trailing smoke, a church steeple white against the blue Colorado sky. The smell of the town drifted toward them on the breeze, horse manure and coal smoke, and something sweet from the bakery. Martha had avoided this place for 2 weeks, had walked to 4 ranches in the opposite direction, taking the long way around, staying clear of the streets where people knew each other's business. Now she had no choice. She needed fabric for new aprons, thread for mending, things she couldn't make appear out of nothing. Ethan pulled the buckboard to a stop in front of Patterson's general store. The wagon creaked as he climbed down, the leather of his boots scuffing against the wooden sidewalk. Martha didn't move. Coming. Ethan was already at the door. She climbed down slow, feeling every eye on the street turn toward her. A woman sweeping her porch stopped mid-stroke. 2 men outside the blacksmith's leaned together, mouths moving. A child pointed before his mother grabbed his hand and hurried him along. The smell of the store wrapped around Martha as she stepped inside pickle brine and tobacco and the dusty sweetness of bolted fabric. Ned Patterson stood behind the counter, a thin man with wire spectacles and ink-stained fingers. His eyes flicked to Martha, then away, like touching something hot. Mr. Cole, he nodded at Ethan. What can I do for you? Lady needs fabric. Thread. Whatever she picks out. Martha moved to the fabric display, her fingers finding the bolts of cotton. Plain colors, practical weights. Nothing fancy. She could feel Patterson watching her, could feel the other customers, 2 women near the pickle barrel watching too. The bell over the door jingled. Well. A voice like honey poured over broken glass. Ethan Cole, we don't see you in town much these days. Martha turned. The woman in the doorway was perhaps 50, dressed in black silk that rustled when she moved. Her hair was pinned up severe, her face powdered pale, her eyes sharp as a hawk tracking prey. Mrs. Hensley? Ethan's voice went flat. Ma'am. And who is this? Mrs. Hensley moved closer, her perfume cutting through the store's honest smells, something floral and too strong. Her gaze traveled down Martha's body, slow and deliberate, taking inventory, finding it lacking. Martha Hill, my housekeeper. Housekeeper? Mrs. Hensley's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. How modern. She turned to the women by the pickle barrel, her voice carrying clear across the store. Ethan Cole always was peculiar. Hiring that to keep house? She let out a small laugh. What would Catherine say? I wonder. The name landed like a slap. Martha's hand stilled on the fabric. The store had gone quiet. Everyone waiting, watching. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence. Dust motes drifted through the light from the window. Reckon my mother'd say it ain't none of your business. Ida. Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried. Same as she always did. Mrs. Hensley's face went red. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Well, I never. That'll be all. Ethan turned to Martha. You got what you need. Martha grabbed the first bolt her hand touched. Blue cotton. She didn't even check the price? Yes. Ethan paid without another word. Loaded the fabric into the wagon. Helped Martha up onto the seat, his hand steady under her elbow. They were halfway home before either of them spoke. She knew your mother. Martha's voice came out rough, scraped raw by shame. Knew her. Hated her. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his hands loose on the reins. The horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the packed dirt. My mother came from money, back east. Family didn't approve when she married my father. A poor rancher. They said, beneath her. The wagon rattled over a rough patch. Martha gripped the seat. Ida Hensley came from the same circles, married a man with property, thought that made her queen of the county. Ethan's jaw tightened. She spent 30 years trying to make my mother feel small. Never did work. Martha looked at him at the hard line of his profile, the gray at his temples, the way his hands held the reins like they'd held 1,000 things that needed steadying. She won't stop, Martha said. Women like that never do? No. Ethan turned to look at her. His eyes were the color of coffee, dark and warm. But my mother never let it touch her, never let it make her less than what she was. The ranch came into view over the hill. The house with its wraparound porch, the barn, the kitchen garden that Martha had started to weed. I'm sorry, she said, for causing trouble. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her full on. You didn't cause nothing. Ida's been waiting 20 years for a reason to come after me. This ain't about you. He paused. Well, it ain't just about you. What do you mean? Ethan climbed down from the wagon, stood there looking up at her, the sun behind him, his face half in shadow. Her son William wanted to court my sister Rebecca. Back in '63, I told him he wasn't good enough. A ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but close. Rebecca married a banker in Kansas, got 3 children, happy as can be. And William drinks too much, can't hold a job. Ethan reached up to help her down. Ida blames me. Been carrying that grudge longer than you've been alive. Probably. Martha's feet hit the ground. Feet hit. Ethan's hand stayed at her waist a moment longer than necessary. So this isn't about me being... She couldn't finish the sentence. About you being what... His voice was soft. You know what... I know what I see. He let go. Stepped back. I see someone who scrubbed my mother's kitchen cleaner than it's been in years. Who makes biscuits that taste like home used to taste. Who works harder than any 2 men I could hire. Martha's throat tightened. That's what I see, Ethan said. What Ida Hensley sees ain't my concern. He walked toward the barn, leaving Martha standing by the wagon with the blue fabric in her arms and something cracking open in her chest that she didn't have a name for. That night, lying in her small room, she heard it. A woman's voice, singing, low and sweet, drifting through the walls like smoke. Martha sat up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The song faded. Silence rushed in to fill the space. She crept to the window, looked out at the moonlit yard. Ethan stood alone by his mother's grave, his hat in his hands. His lips were moving, but the singing had stopped. 3 weeks, and the house had learned to breathe again. Martha stood in the pantry doorway, surveying her work. Glass jars arranged by content and date, labels facing out proper, flour and sugar in their bins, lids sealed tight against weevils. The smell of sourdough starter rose from the crock on the counter, tangy and alive. Like the kitchen itself had woken up from a long sleep, she hadn't meant to make this place her own. Had told herself every morning that this was temporary, that Ethan Cole would wake up one day and realize his mistake, that the familiar weight of rejection would settle back onto her shoulders where it had always lived. 3 weeks, and still she was here. The screen door banged. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the stove, where a pot of beans had been simmering since dawn. The smell of ham hock and onion filled the kitchen, rich and savory, the kind of smell that said home to folks who remembered what home meant. She didn't turn when Ethan's boots crossed the floor. She knew his step now heavier than Jesse's, slower, deliberate. A man who thought before he moved. "Smells good. Lima beans with ham hock. Cornbread be ready in 20 minutes. She heard him settle into his chair, the creak of wood, the soft thump of his hat hitting the table. These sounds had become familiar too, part of the rhythm of days that had begun to feel less like borrowed time, and more like something she couldn't name. "Saw you working on the windows this morning." Martha turned. Ethan was looking at the kitchen window, where afternoon light poured through glass that actually sparkled now. Free of years of grime, the light fell across the table in golden squares, catching the dust motes that floated lazy in the air. "They needed doing." "Reckon they did." He paused, his fingers tracing a groove in the wooden table. "House looks different. Feels different." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, turned back to the cornbread, checking its color through the stove's iron door. The heat pressed against her face, dry and fierce. "Place ain't felt like this since Mama passed." Martha's hand stilled on the stove handle. In 3 weeks. Ethan Cole had offered exactly 4 pieces of personal information. His mother's name was Catherine. His father had died 6 months after her. He'd been running the ranch alone since, and he didn't like his coffee weak. Everything else she'd learned from Jesse, in fragments dropped between complaints about his knees and observations about the weather. Jesse mentioned her. Martha kept her voice careful, steady. Said she was a fine woman. She was. The silence stretched thin as wire. The beans bubbled soft in their pot. Outside, a mockingbird ran through its catalog of stolen songs. Fever took her. Ethan stopped, his hand wrapped around his coffee cup, knuckles going white. "Summer of '81. Martha waited. The cornbread's crust was turning golden now, cracking along the top the way it should. Pa went. Another pause, longer this time. 6 months after, Doc said it was his heart, but I reckon he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Martha pulled the cornbread from the oven, set it on the table, the iron pan too hot to touch without a rag. She sat down across from him. "I know something about that," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. Watching someone fade? Ethan looked at her. Really looked. The way he had that first day on the porch, like she was a person worth seeing. Your mama? 3 years ago. She'd been sick a long time. The coughing sickness. Same as took my father before her. Martha's hands found the edge of the table, pressed against the wood she'd scrubbed until her palms ached. I tended her through all of it. Fed her when she couldn't lift a spoon. Read to her when her eyes gave out. That's a hard road. It was the only road I had. She smoothed a wrinkle in the tablecloth. After she passed, there wasn't no one else? No family left? No place that wanted me around? Their loss? 2 words. He said them flat and certain, like stating that water ran downhill or the sun came up morningside. Martha's throat went tight. She stood quick, busying herself with plates and forks, with ladling beans into bowls, with all the small tasks that kept her hands moving and her face turned away. They ate in the silence that had become their custom. But something had shifted in that quiet. Some wall come down that Martha hadn't even known was standing there. After supper, Ethan didn't head straight to the barn the way he usually did. He stopped on the porch, looking at the rocking chair that had sat empty since Martha arrived. The chair with the broken slat that she'd noticed her first day. That was Mama's chair. Martha stood in the doorway, a dish towel in her hands. I figured as much. Been meaning to fix it. He ran his hand along the broken slat, his fingers gentle. Just never seemed to, couldn't bring myself to. I could do it, Martha heard herself speak. I'm handy with wood glue. My father taught me, back when. No, Ethan shook his head. No, I'll do it. Should have done it a long time ago. He went to the barn and came back with a tin of wood glue, a clamp, and a piece of oak that looked like it had been waiting for exactly this purpose. Martha watched from the doorway as he worked. His big hands surprisingly gentle, fitting the broken slat back into place with the care of a man handling something precious. The sun painted the sky orange and pink as it sank toward the mountains. The smell of warm wood and glue mixed with the evening air. Somewhere in the pasture, the horses moved through the tall grass, their shapes dark against the fading light. Ethan finished as the first stars appeared. He sat down in the chair, tested it. The wood creaked once, familiar and right, then held steady beneath him. He looked up at Martha. Something crossed his face that she hadn't seen before, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the ghost of joy. Sit with me a spell. She brought out her mending basket, settled into the straight-back chair by the door, the one she'd claimed without meaning to. The evening sounds wrapped around them like a quilt. Jesse's harmonica drifting from the bunkhouse, slow and mournful, the horses settling in the barn, somewhere far off a coyote starting up its lonesome conversation with the moon. Martha's needle moved through the fabric of one of Ethan's shirts, closing a tear in the sleeve with small, neat stitches. The rhythm steadied her hands, her thoughts, the strange fluttering in her chest that she refused to examine too close. You ever think about leaving? Ethan asked. The needle paused. Leaving. This place? Colorado. Starting over somewhere nobody knows your name or your history? Martha pulled the thread through, tied off the stitch, started a new one. Used to think about it all the time, she said. Figured I'd head west, California, maybe somewhere warm, where nobody'd look at me and see everything they'd already decided I was. She smoothed the mended fabric. But I never had the money, and after Mama died, I didn't have the heart either. And now, the question hung in the evening air like the first firefly of summer. Martha looked up from her mending to find Ethan watching her, his face half in shadow from the porch lamp, half in the silver light of the rising moon. Now I don't know, she said honestly. 3 weeks ago, I would have taken any train going anywhere. Now, she didn't finish, didn't know how to. Ethan nodded slow, as if she'd answered something he hadn't quite asked. He rocked the chair gentle, the movement smooth now that the slat was mended. The creak of wood on wood was steady as a heartbeat. Mama used to sit out here every evening, he said. Said she could see clear to forever from this porch. Said it made all the small stuff, the gossip, the hard years, the people who tried to make her feel less than she was seem smaller, like it didn't matter so much, set against all that sky. Martha looked out at the view, the rolling hills going dark, the distant mountains sharp against the purple sky, the stars coming out one by one like God was lighting lamps across heaven. She understood what Catherine Cole had meant. Jesse asked me something today, Ethan said. About you. Martha's needle stopped again. What'd he ask? Asked if I was planning to keep you on permanent? The word landed between them, soft but heavy, like snow falling on bare ground. What'd you tell him? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. The rocking chair creaked its steady rhythm. The light faded another shade toward full dark. Jesse's harmonica had stopped, and the only sounds were the crickets and the soft breathing of the horses in the barn. Told him I hadn't asked you yet. Martha's hands trembled on the mending. She forced them still, forced her voice steady, even though her heart was beating so loud she was sure he could hear it. Asked me what? Ethan turned to look at her. In the dying light, his face was hard to read, but his eyes caught the lamplight and held it. If you wanted to stay. The crickets sang. The coyote called again, closer now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Martha opened her mouth to answer. But before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats came up the road. Fast. Too fast for a friendly visit at this hour. Jesse's voice cut through the dusk from somewhere near the bunkhouse, sharp, with something that sounded almost like warning. Ethan Ryder's coming, 3 of them. And they ain't slowing down. Ethan was on his feet before Martha could blink, his hand reaching for the rifle propped by the door. 3 riders crested the hill, their shapes dark against the last red glow of sunset. Even in the failing light, Martha could make out the leader, a woman sitting side saddle, her posture stiff as a poker. Her black dress unmistakable. Mrs. Ida Hensley. And she had brought company. The riders hadn't come for trouble that night, just questions. Mrs. Hensley wanting to know if Ethan needed help finding proper household assistance, her eyes sliding over Martha like she was furniture that didn't match the room. Ethan had sent them away with 6 words, "Got all the help I need." But Martha had seen the look on Ida Hensley's face as she turned her horse toward the road, the pinched mouth, the narrowed eyes, the look of a woman who wasn't finished. 2 weeks had passed since then. 2 weeks of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the knock on the door, for the familiar feeling of being pushed out before she could settle in. It hadn't come. And slowly, carefully, like a wild animal learning to trust a gentle hand. Martha had let herself stop flinching at every sound from the road. This morning she knelt in the kitchen garden, her fingers deep in soil that was finally starting to look like something other than neglected dirt. She'd pulled the weeds until her back screamed, turned the earth until blisters rose on her palms, worked in manure from the barn until the ground was dark and rich and ready for planting. Ethan had found the seeds 3 days ago. a wooden box tucked behind rusted tools and forgotten tack in the barn, covered in dust thick as velvet. Inside, brown paper packets with Catherine's handwriting, those same careful flourishes on the capital letters. Tomatoes, 1880. Squash, 1880. Beans, 1880. 5 years old. Some of them might not sprout at all. Martha planted them anyway. Some things deserved the chance to try. The sun warmed her back through her calico dress as she worked, pressing seeds into shallow furrows, covering them with soil, moving down the row with a rhythm that felt almost like prayer. The smell of earth filled her nose rich, alive, full of possibility. A meadowlark sang from the fence post, and somewhere in the pasture a horse nickered soft. A shadow fell across her hands. She looked up. Ethan stood at the edge of the garden, a seed packet in his hand. Tomatoes. The paper was worn soft at the edges, like it had been handled many times by someone who couldn't quite bring themselves to plant what was inside. "Mama loved tomatoes," he said. His voice was rough, the way it got when he talked about Catherine. Used to can them every fall, enough to last the whole winter. She'd put them up in those blue jars, and come January she'd make this soup that tasted like summer hadn't ever left. Martha sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her apron. Dirt streaked across the worn fabric like war paint. These seeds might be too old to grow. Maybe. He turned the packet over in his fingers, gentle as if it were made of glass. But she'd have wanted someone to try. He stepped into the garden. The soft earth gave under his boots. He knelt down beside her in the dirt, his knee almost touching hers. Martha caught the smell of him leather and horse and something clean underneath, like lye soap and sun-dried cotton and honest sweat. "Show me where," he said. She pointed to the row she'd prepared, her hand trembling just slightly. "There, about an inch deep, 6 inches apart." They worked in silence. Ethan's hands moved careful, pressing each seed into place, covering it gentle with dark soil. His fingers were rough and scarred, built for roping cattle and mending fences and all the hard work that kept a ranch alive. But they handled the tiny seeds like they were something precious, something sacred. Martha reached for the next packet at the same moment he did. Their hands touched. Neither pulled away. His skin was warm, calloused, real. Martha felt the contact all the way up her arm, spreading through her chest like the heat from a summer stove. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat. A meadowlark called from the pasture, its song bright and clear. "Tomatoes," Martha said. Her voice came out strange, higher than it should have been. "Tomatoes," Ethan repeated. But he was looking at her, not at the seed packet. His eyes were the color of good coffee, dark and warm and holding something she was afraid to name. He pulled his hand back first, cleared his throat like he was trying to shake something loose, went back to planting like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Martha knew it the way she knew rain was coming when her knees ached, the way she knew bread was ready by the smell of it, the way she knew her own heartbeat. Something had shifted between them, quiet as a seed pushing through dark soil toward the light. They finished the planting as the sun climbed higher, burning the dew off the grass. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his knees, extended his hand to help her up. Martha hesitated, took it. His grip was strong. He pulled her to her feet easy, like her weight was nothing at all. And for one dizzying moment they stood close enough that she could count the gray hairs at his temple, could see the pulse beating in his throat. "Thank you," she said, "for the seeds. Thank you for planting them." The space between them felt charged, like the air before a summer thunderstorm. Martha stepped back, smoothed her apron with hands that wouldn't stay still, tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. That evening, she made gingerbread. She'd been carrying the recipe card in her apron pocket for weeks, taking it out sometimes at night to read by lamplight. Catherine's handwriting, careful and sure. The ink faded to brown, but still clear as a bell. Ethan's favorite, extra molasses. The kitchen filled with the smell of ginger and spice and molasses as the cake baked. Martha watched through the stove window, adjusting the damper to keep the heat even. Her mother had never made gingerbread, had never made much of anything sweet, claiming sugar was wasteful. That plain food built character. But Catherine Cole had made gingerbread for her son, had written down the recipe so it wouldn't be lost, so that someone, someday, could make it again. Some kinds of love speak in sugar and spice and the warmth of an oven on a cool evening. Ethan came in from the barn as she pulled the pan from the stove. He stopped in the doorway, his frame blocking the last light of day. His face went strange and still. That smell. Martha set the pan on the table, the heat rising off it in waves. "Found the recipe? In your mama's things? Behind the flour bin." She hesitated. "I hope you don't mind my using it." He didn't answer. Just stood there staring at the gingerbread like it might disappear if he looked away. Like he was seeing something more than just a cake. "Ain't had that since she passed," he said finally. His voice was rough as sandpaper. "Ain't smelled it. Even couldn't bring myself to—" "I know." Martha cut a square, set it on a plate. The cake was dark and moist, just the way the recipe said it should be. Jessie told me it was her specialty. Figured it was time. Ethan sat down heavy in his chair, looked at the gingerbread, looked at Martha. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." He picked up the square, took a bite, closed his eyes. Martha watched his face, watched the way his throat moved when he swallowed, the way his hands tightened on the plate until his knuckles went white. She'd expected him to eat in his usual efficient way, cleaning his plate without much comment. Instead, he set the gingerbread down, pressed his fingers to his eyes, like he was trying to hold something back. "It tastes just like hers." The words came out barely louder than a whisper. Martha's chest ached with something she'd never felt before. Not pity, not sympathy. Something deeper than both. "Ethan, she would have liked you." He dropped his hand, looked at her with eyes that were brighter than they ought to be. "I keep thinking that every day, watching you work around this place, she would have been proud to know you." Martha's throat closed up tight. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "That's a kind thing to say." "It ain't kindness. It's truth." He pushed back from the table, stood quick, like he couldn't sit still another second. "I got to check on the horses." He was gone before she could respond. The screen door slapped shut behind him. Martha stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of gingerbread thick in the air, the taste of it on her tongue from where she'd tested a crumb. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was doing something strange and painful against her ribs. She was falling for Ethan Cole. The thought hit her like cold water from a well bucket. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, pressing her hands to her face. 37 years old. Never been courted. Never been kissed. Never been looked at by a man with anything other than pity or disgust, or that quick slide of the eyes that said she wasn't worth seeing. She'd made her peace with that. had built her whole life around expecting nothing, wanting nothing, needing no one. And now here she was, trembling in a dead woman's kitchen, sick with feelings she had no right to feel. Ethan Cole was her employer, a respected rancher, a man who could have his pick of any woman in the county. Younger women, prettier women, women who didn't take up so much space in a room, who didn't draw stares and whispers wherever they went. She was the fat spinster he'd hired out of desperation or pity or some combination of both. Nothing more than that. Nothing more. Martha stood, smoothed her apron, began washing the dishes with hands that shook. No matter how hard she tried to steady them, she would put this feeling away, lock it up tight in her chest, the way she'd locked up every other wanting in her life. She would do her job, earn her $1 a week, and be grateful for what she had. Anything else was foolishness. Dangerous foolishness. The screen door opened. Martha didn't turn. Martha? Ethan's voice. Close. Right behind her. She kept her eyes on the dishes, on the soap bubbles catching the lamplight. Supper's put away. I'm making. Martha, turn around. She turned. He was standing 2 feet away, so close she could see the rise and fall of his chest, the dampness at his temples. He was holding something in his hand, a small bunch of wildflowers, purple and yellow, their stems crushed and bent where he'd gripped them too tight. I ain't good at this, he said. The words came out rough, halting, like each one cost him something. Never have been. But I've been thinking about what I said on the porch, about you staying. Martha couldn't breathe. I don't want you to stay just as the housekeeper. His voice cracked on the last word. He thrust the flowers toward her like they were burning his hand. I want you to stay because this place feels like home again when you're in it. Because I look forward to supper not for the food, but for the company. Because when I'm out in the fields, I catch myself wondering what you're doing. If you're singing while you work, the way you think nobody hears. Martha's hand trembled as she took the flowers. The petals were soft against her fingers, the stems still warm from his grip. I picked these from the south pasture, Ethan said, rushing now like he might lose his nerve. They ain't much, just wildflowers. But I thought, Mama used to pick them every spring, said they were the first sign that winter was truly over. Martha lifted the flowers to her nose. They smelled like sunshine and green grass and something sweeter underneath, like honey left out in the warm air. Your mama drew these, she whispered. On the recipe card, in the corner, same colors. Ethan's face changed, softened into something she'd never seen there before. I didn't know that. Little purple and yellow flowers. Right there by her name. Martha's voice was steadier now. She loved these. They stood there in the kitchen, the lamp flickering soft, the smell of gingerbread still hanging in the air. The flowers trembled in Martha's hand. I ain't pretty, she said quiet. I ain't young. I ain't what any man would choose if he had choosing. Martha. Let me finish. She met his eyes. I come with nothing but a carpet bag and a lifetime of people telling me I wasn't enough. You need to know that. You need to understand what you're asking for. Ethan stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the pulse beating fast in his throat, could smell the grass and horse and honest sweat on him. I know exactly what I'm asking for, he said. I'm asking for the woman who brought my mother's kitchen back to life, who planted seeds that might not grow because they deserved the chance anyway. Who makes gingerbread from a recipe card she found behind a flower bin because she knew it would matter? His voice dropped low. I'm asking for you, Martha. Just you. The wildflowers trembled in her grip. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I never learned." "Neither did I." His hand reached out, hovered near her cheek but didn't touch, like he was asking permission. "Reckon we could figure it out together." The kitchen was very quiet. The gingerbread cooled on the table. The lamp cast gold light across everything. Soft and warm. Martha opened her mouth to answer. The sound of horses came up the road. More than one. Moving fast, hooves pounding against the packed earth like thunder rolling in. Ethan's head snapped toward the window. "That ain't Jesse," he said. Martha looked. 3 horses cresting the hill. 4. 5. A whole procession raising dust against the evening sky like a storm coming in. And at the front, her black dress unmistakable against the fading light, rode Ida Hensley. This time she had brought an army. Martha set the wildflowers on the table. Her hands had stopped trembling. Something cold and familiar settled into her bones, the hard shell she'd grown over 37 years, the one she'd almost forgotten how to wear. "Stay inside," Ethan said. "No." He turned, surprised. They came to see me." Martha moved toward the door, her boots steady on the wooden floor. "They can see me." She stepped onto the porch before he could argue. The evening air hit her face, warm and soft, carrying the smell of dust and horse sweat from the approaching riders. 5 of them. No, 6. Ida Hensley in front, her black dress stark against the purple sky. Behind her, 4 women Martha recognized from the general store, the ones who'd whispered, the ones who'd looked away. And bringing up the rear, a thin man in a minister's collar, his face pale as milk. Reverend Thomas Whitfield. Martha had seen him once. From across the street in Cedar Hollow. Had thought about attending his church. Had decided against it when she'd seen how the congregation looked at strangers. The horses stopped at the gate. Ida Hensley didn't dismount. She sat her side saddle like a queen surveying conquered territory. Her eyes moving from Martha to Ethan to the wildflowers visible through the kitchen window. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice carried across the yard, sharp as broken glass. "We've come on a matter of Christian concern." Ethan stepped up beside Martha, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She could feel the heat of him, could smell the grass and leather and honest sweat. That's so?" The Moral Welfare Committee of Cedar Hollow Methodist Church has received troubling reports. Ida's gaze fixed on Martha, pinning her like a bug to a board. "About the arrangement. At this residence." Martha felt the weight of 6 pairs of eyes. The judgment. The curiosity dressed up in Sunday clothes. Her stomach churned, but she kept her face still as stone. "Ain't no arrangement," Ethan said to me. "I got a housekeeper, same as half the ranches in the county." A housekeeper? Ida's lips pressed thin as a knife blade. An unmarried woman, living alone with an unmarried man, sharing meals, sharing... She paused, the word hanging in the air like something foul. "Quarters. Her room's out back. Separate entrance. I sleep in the house." Ethan's voice had gone flat as hammered iron. "Anything else you want to know about my sleeping arrangements? Ida?" One of the women behind Ida gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The minister cleared his throat, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mr. Cole, there's no need for coarseness. We're simply here to offer assistance." Reverend Whitfield urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves clopping against the hard-packed earth. "My sister's daughter, Prudence, is seeking employment. She's 17, from a good family, and would provide a more appropriate presence in your household." Martha's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her nails bit into her palms, sharp little crescents of pain. More appropriate? Ethan's voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that came before a storm broke. Surely you can see how this looks. Ida leaned forward in her saddle, her eyes glittering in the fading light. A woman of her condition. Taking up residence with a respectable bachelor. People talk. Mr. Cole. They wonder what kind of man would what? The question cut through the air like a whip crack. Martha felt Ethan go rigid beside her. Would hire someone based on what they can do instead of what they look like. He stepped forward, off the porch, into the yard. His boots hit the dirt hard. Would give a job to a woman who'd been turned away by every ranch in the county because folks like you decided she wasn't worth the bother. Mr. Cole. My mother spent her whole life listening to people like you. Ethan's voice rose, filling the yard, bouncing off the barn walls. Telling her she'd married beneath her. Telling her she didn't belong in polite society. Telling her she ought to be ashamed of who she loved. He pointed at Martha, his hand steady as a rock. That woman has worked harder in 6 weeks than your whole committee has worked in 6 years. She brought this house back to life. She planted my mother's garden with seeds 5 years old because she believed they deserved a chance to grow. He stopped, swallowed hard. She matters, he said. Quieter now. And I won't have you riding onto my land telling me she don't. Silence fell heavy as a wool blanket. The horses shifted, their bits jingling soft. One of the women behind Ida was staring at Martha with something that might have been shame. Ida Hensley's face had gone red as a summer sunset. Well, she gathered her reins, the leather creaking. I see we've wasted our time coming here, but mark my words, Mr. Cole, when this situation ends badly, don't come to the church looking for sympathy. She wheeled her horse. The others followed. A ragged procession heading back down the road they'd come. Dust rising behind them like smoke from a dying fire. Martha watched them go. Her legs were shaking. Her whole body was shaking, trembling like a newborn colt trying to stand. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. Martha. She couldn't look at him. Couldn't let him see what was happening to her face. I have to... Her voice cracked, split right down the middle. I have to check on the... She was off the porch before she finished the sentence. Moving fast. Faster than she'd moved in years, her boots pounding against the ground. Around the side of the house to her little room and back. She made it through the door. Got it closed behind her. Then her knees gave out. She slid down the wall, the rough wood catching at her dress, pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. The sobs came anyway, tearing out of her chest like something wild trying to escape. She hadn't cried in years, hadn't let herself, had trained all that weakness out of her back when tears had stopped doing any good. But now it was all coming out every turned-away job, every pitying look, every time someone had made her feel like less than human just for existing in the body she'd been given. And underneath it all, the worst thing, the thing that hurt more than anything Ida Hensley could say. Ethan had defended her, had stood up for her in front of the whole committee, had said she mattered like he believed it down to his bones. And all she could think was, now he'll see. Now he'll understand what it costs to keep me around. Now he'll realize it ain't worth the trouble. She pressed her forehead to her knees. Let the sobs come until they wore themselves ragged. A knock on the door. Martha. She didn't answer. Martha, Noah, I know you're in there. I can hear you. She pressed her hand harder over her mouth. Her chest heaved. "I ain't going away," Ethan said through the door. "I'll stand here all night if I have to. All week. However long it takes." The absurdity of it cut through her grief like a blade. She wiped her face with her apron, knowing it wouldn't help, knowing she looked like exactly what she was, a fat woman who'd been crying like a lost child. She opened the door. Ethan stood there with his hat in his hands. His face was strange, almost scared, like he was looking at something precious that might break. "I shouldn't have said all that," he said. "In front of them? In front of you? Made it worse? Probably." "No." Martha's voice came out rough, scraped raw as a planed board. "You made it better? That's the whole problem." He frowned, his brow furrowing deep. "I don't understand." "No one's ever—" She stopped, started again, forcing the words out one by one. "In my whole life, no one's ever stood up for me like that. Not once, not my father, not my mother, not anyone. And now you did, and they're going to make your life miserable for it. And the whole town's gonna talk. And it's my fault for being here, for thinking I could—" "Stop!" He stepped into the room, her tiny room, barely big enough for the bed and the washstand. He filled the space, blocking out the evening light from the doorway. "Listen to me." His voice was low, urgent, like he was trying to tell her something important. "I don't care what they say. I don't care what the whole county says. You hear me? You should care. You have to live here. You have to." "I have to what?" He was close now, close enough that she could see the dampness at the corners of his eyes. "Go back to eating alone. Go back to a house that feels like a tomb. Go back to being the man who let his mother's garden die because he couldn't bear to look at it." Martha's breath caught in her throat. "You brought this place back to life," Ethan said. "You brought me back to life. And if the price of that is Ida Hensley running her mouth all over town, then it's a price I'll pay gladly. Every single day." "Ethan, I meant what I said. Before they came—" He reached out slow, giving her time to pull away. His hand touched her cheek. Rough calluses against wet skin. "I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper, as—" He trailed off. His thumb brushed away a tear. "As what?" Martha whispered. "I don't know yet." His voice was barely louder than breathing. "But I want to find out. If you'll let me." The room was very small. The evening light was fading fast. Somewhere outside, a whippoorwill started up its lonesome call, over and over. Martha looked at this man who had defended her against the whole town, who was standing in her tiny room with his heart in his hands for the second time in one evening. She thought about her mother's voice. No man wants to wake up to that every morning. She thought about 37 years of believing it. "Okay," she said. Ethan blinked. "Okay. Okay. I'll let you—" Her voice was steadier now, surprising her. "Find out. I mean, what this is." Something broke open in his face. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. "Okay," he repeated. His hand was still on her cheek. Neither of them moved to change that. The sound of hooves on the road shattered the moment, like glass breaking. Ethan's head snapped toward the window. "They're coming back." Martha pushed past him, looked out into the gathering dark. A single rider this time. Coming fast. Not Ida Hensley's side saddle shape. A man, hunched low over his horse's neck, pushing the animal hard. Jesse came running from the bunkhouse. his old legs carrying him faster than Martha had ever seen. "That's Ned Patterson," he shouted, "and he's riding like the devil himself is on his tail." The rider reached the gate. His face was white as bone in the last light. "Cole," Ned Patterson's voice cracked, "you got to come to town. They're holding a meeting, the whole church council. Ida's got them riled up and they're talking about—" He stopped, looked at Martha standing in the doorway of her little room. "They're talking about running her out of the county." Martha stood in the doorway of her room, Ned Patterson's words hanging in the air like smoke from a gun. Running her out? She knew what that meant. Had heard stories. Whispered between women doing laundry at the river back in Pueblo. A widow in Denver. Accused of loose morals. Her belongings thrown into the street while neighbors watched and did nothing. A school teacher in Kansas, driven out of town in her nightgown because someone spread lies about her and a married man. "How long do we have?" Ethan's voice was steady, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "Meetings tomorrow evening. 6 o'clock at the church." Ned wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "Ida's been working folks up all day. Saying things about Miss Hill. Things that ain't true. But people are listening because they got nothing better to do." "What kind of things?" Ned looked at Martha. His eyes slid away like water off a rock. "I'd rather not say in front of the lady." Martha's stomach dropped through the floor. She could imagine, had heard similar things whispered about other women. Women who'd committed the sin of existing without a man's name to hide behind. "Go home, Ned." Ethan's voice was tight as a fiddle string. "I appreciate the warning. Cole, I'm sorry. Truly. I am. I tried to talk sense into them, but Ida's got the minister convinced God himself wants this done. And once he's in, the whole council follows like sheep." Ned gathered his reins, the leather creaking. "For what it's worth, my mother thinks the whole thing's foolishness. Says Miss Hill's the best thing to happen to this ranch since your mama passed." He rode off into the dark, the hoofbeats fading until there was nothing left but the sound of crickets and Martha's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She walked past Ethan without speaking. Through the house, past the kitchen that still smelled of gingerbread, to her room. Her hands moved without thinking, pulling the carpet bag from under the bed, opening it, reaching for her spare dress on the nail. "What are you doing?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the lamplight. "What's it look like?" Martha folded the dress, pressed it into the bag. Her movements were jerky, too fast, like a puppet with tangled strings. "I'm leaving. Before they have to run me out. Before they drag me through the streets like some kind of—" Her voice broke. "At least this way I keep some dignity. What little I got left." "Martha." "Don't." The word came out sharp as a slap. She kept packing, not looking at him. "I told you this would happen. First day, I told myself not to get comfortable. But I did anyway. And now look. Now the whole town is talking about me like I'm something scraped off the bottom of a boot. And you're going to pay for it. And I can't. I don't care about the town. Well, I do." She spun to face him, and the look on her face stopped him cold. "I care that you stood up for me, and now they're going to make you pay for your kindness. I care that your mother's good name is going to get dragged through the mud because you hired the fat spinster nobody else would touch." Her voice cracked wide open. "I care that I let myself believe this could be different, that I could be different, that maybe, just maybe, someone might actually—" She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. "Think what—" Ethan's voice was soft. Martha couldn't look at him. She stared at the Bible in her hands, the cracked leather warm against her fingers. "That I deserved to be here," she whispered. "That I deserved you." The silence stretched thin as spider silk. Martha waited for the sound of his boots retreating, for the door closing behind him, for the familiar relief of being alone with her failure. Instead, he crossed the room in 2 steps and took the Bible from her hands. "Sit down." "Ethan, sit down." "Martha." She sat on the edge of the bed. The corn-husk mattress crackled under her weight, loud in the quiet room. Ethan lowered himself beside her. The bed frame groaned. He set the Bible between them, then turned to face her. "I spent 38 years learning that what people say and what's true are 2 different things entirely." His voice was low, rough like gravel. "My mother taught me that. She married my father when every gossip in 3 counties said she was throwing herself away on a dirt-poor rancher. They talked about her the same way they're talking about you now. Said worse, probably." Martha's hands twisted in her lap, wringing the fabric of her skirt. She never let it touch her. Never let their poison make her small. He paused, his jaw working. "And when she was dying, she told me something, made me promise to remember it." "What?" She said, "Find someone who sees what's there, not what's missing." Martha's breath caught like a fishbone in her throat. "I see you, Martha Hill." Ethan's hand covered hers, stilling the nervous movement. His palm was warm, calloused, real. "I see a woman who works harder than any 2 men I could hire, who brought my mother's kitchen back to life when I couldn't even look at it without wanting to break something, who planted seeds 5 years old because she believed they deserved a chance." "Ethan, I ain't finished." His grip tightened, gentle but firm. "I see someone my mother would have been proud to know, someone I'm proud to know. And I ain't about to let Ida Hensley or her committee or the whole blamed church council take that away from me, from us." Martha's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "They'll make your life miserable. Let them try. They'll talk about you, say you're weak or foolish, or they've been talking about me for 20 years. Ever since I told Ida's son William he wasn't good enough to court my sister, and she's been nursing that grudge like a sick calf ever since." A ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but close. "This ain't really about morality, Martha. This ain't about protecting the community from sin. This is about Ida Hensley finally finding something she can use to hurt me." Martha stared at him. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows across his face. "That don't change nothing," she said slowly. "They're still going to try to run me out. They're still going to drag my name through the mud and yours along with it. Only if you go—" Martha's head came up. "You leave. They win." Ethan's eyes held hers, steady and certain. "You leave. They get to say they were right about you. Right about me. Right about everything they've been whispering behind their hands." His jaw tightened. "But if you stay, if I stay, they'll never stop. They'll never let it go. Maybe, maybe not." He released her hands, stood up, paced the tiny room like a caged animal. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. "But I'd rather fight for something real than surrender to something false. And this—" He gestured between them, the movement sharp and frustrated. "This is real. Whatever it is, whatever it might become." Martha looked at the carpet bag on the bed, at the Bible beside it, at this man who was asking her to do the hardest thing she'd ever done in her life. Stay. Stand her ground. Believe she was worth fighting for. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life running before anyone could make me run. It's easier that way. Safer. You don't get hurt so bad when you're the one doing the leaving." "I know. My own mother." The words stuck in her throat like something rotten. She forced them out anyway, each one tasting like ash. "My own mother told me right before she died that it was a blessing I never married. Said the world had done me a kindness, not letting any man close enough to see what I really was." She gestured at herself. Her body, the flesh that had been her prison for 37 years. Said no man would want to wake up to this every morning. Said I should be grateful nobody had to. Ethan stopped pacing, turned to face her full on. "Your mother was wrong." "You don't know that." "I know what I see when I wake up and come in for breakfast." He moved closer, his voice dropping low. "I see a woman who makes coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, who hums hymns when she thinks nobody's listening, who talks to the bread dough like it's a stubborn child that needs convincing." His voice dropped lower still. "I see someone I look forward to seeing every single morning, someone who makes this old house feel like something worth coming home to." Martha's walls gave way. The tears she'd been fighting spilled over, running hot down her cheeks. Not the wild sobs of earlier, something quieter, deeper. Years of armor dissolving in the face of simple, honest kindness. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." He sat beside her again. Closer this time. His shoulder pressed against hers, solid and warm. "We could go to that meeting tomorrow," he said, "together. Let them say their piece, and then say ours. They won't listen. Some won't, but some might." He turned to look at her, his face serious. "And even if none of them do, at least they'll know we ain't afraid, that we ain't ashamed of nothing." Martha wiped her face with her apron. Her hands had stopped shaking. "You'd do that stand up in front of the whole town with me. I'd stand up in front of the whole territory if that's what it took." She looked at him, at this man who had asked her what she could do instead of looking at what she was, who had given her a chance when nobody else would, who was offering to fight beside her against people who'd known him his whole life. "Okay," she said. Okay, I'll stay." She reached for the carpet bag, pulled out the dress she'd just packed. "But I ain't going to that meeting looking like something the cat dragged in." She held up the dark blue dress, the one she'd made 3 years ago, the one she'd never had anywhere fine enough to wear. "I'm going to look them in the eye," she said, "and I'm going to do it looking like I belong there just as much as any of them." Ethan's face softened into something that looked almost like pride. "Yes, ma'am." He stood, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Martha?" "Yes?" "That dress." He cleared his throat, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Blue's a real good color on you." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Martha sat alone in her tiny room, holding the blue dress against her chest. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Tomorrow she would walk into that church and face down every person who'd ever looked at her like she was less than human. Tomorrow she would stand beside Ethan Cole and let the whole town see that she wasn't ashamed of who she was or what she wanted. The thought terrified her down to her bones. The thought thrilled her just as deep. She was still sitting there, the dress clutched in her hands, when Jesse's voice cut through the night like a knife through butter. Cole, you better come quick." Martha ran to the window, pushed aside the flour sack curtain. Torchlight, coming up the road from town. Not one torch, not two, at least a dozen, bobbing in the darkness like angry stars fallen to earth, and leading them, her face lit orange by the flames, rode Ida Hensley. They weren't waiting for tomorrow's meeting. Martha didn't think. She moved. The blue dress lay forgotten on the bed. She ran through the house in her work clothes, her boots pounding on the wooden floor, and burst onto the front porch just as Ethan came around the corner from the barn. The torches were closer now. Close enough that she could see faces in the flickering light, men and women she recognized from the general store, from the streets of Cedar Hollow, people who had looked away when she walked past, people who had whispered behind their hands. Now they were here, on Ethan's land, with fire. "Get inside," Ethan said. "No, Martha." "I said no." She stepped off the porch, her boots hitting the dirt of the yard. "I'm done hiding. I'm done running. If they want to say something to me, they can say it to my face." The procession stopped at the gate. Ida Hensley sat her horse like a general surveying a conquered land, her face hard as flint in the torchlight. The smell of burning pitch drifted across the yard, sharp and acrid. "Mr. Cole," her voice rang out clear as a church bell. "We've come to give your housekeeper one last chance to leave this county peacefully." Ethan moved to stand beside Martha. His hand brushed hers in the dark, quick and warm. "And if she don't want to leave, then the good Christian people of Cedar Hollow will have to take matters into their own hands." Ida gestured at the crowd behind her, the torchlight catching the satisfied curve of her lips. "We won't have this kind of sin flourishing in our community. The Bible's clear about a lot of things." "Ida." A new voice cut through the night, old and cracked, but carrying the weight of decades. "Including bearing false witness against thy neighbor." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A wagon rolled through, pulled by a single gray mare. In the seat sat a woman so old she looked carved from driftwood. White hair pulled back severe, a wool shawl wrapped around shoulders that had bent with time but never broken. Mrs. Agatha Patterson, Ned's mother. The woman who had waved at Martha from across the general store all those weeks ago. "Agatha," Ida's voice went tight as a banjo string. "This doesn't concern you." "The blazes it don't." The old woman pulled her wagon to a stop between the torches and the house, her mare snorting at the flames. "I've lived in this valley 63 years, watched it grow from nothing but dirt and dreams. Watched your mother come here as a bride, Ida Hensley, with nothing but a trunk of fancy dresses and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass." Someone in the crowd snickered. Ida's face went red as a hot poker. "This woman," Ida pointed at Martha, her finger trembling. "This woman is living in sin with this woman," Agatha cut in, her voice hard as iron, "has done nothing but work. I've heard about it from everyone who's had dealings with the Cole Ranch these past weeks. Jesse Walker says the house ain't been this clean since Catherine died. My own son says the books are balanced proper for the first time in years." She turned her sharp old eyes on Martha. "That true, girl?" Martha's throat was dry as August dust. "Yes, ma'am." "She keeping separate quarters?" "Yes, ma'am. Room out back, separate entrance." "And has Ethan Cole behaved as anything other than a gentleman toward you?" Martha felt Ethan stiffen beside her. She thought of the wildflowers, the hand on her cheek, the words spoken in her tiny room. He's been, she swallowed hard. He's been the most decent man I've ever known. Agatha nodded slow, her white hair catching the torchlight. She turned back to face Ida. There's your answer. Separate quarters. Proper behavior. A woman doing honest work for honest pay. Her voice went cold as a mountain stream. The only sin I see here tonight is a mob showing up with torches to terrorize a woman who ain't done nothing wrong except exist in a body you don't approve of. She's corrupting him. Ida's composure cracked wide open, her voice rising to a shriek. Everyone can see it. A woman like that, worming her way into a respectable household. Using her what? Ida. Agatha's voice could have frozen fire. Her cooking, her cleaning, her bookkeeping, her ability to make a house feel like a home again. She shook her head, slow and sad. Or are you just mad because Ethan Cole wouldn't let your boy court his sister 20 years ago, and you've been waiting all this time for any excuse to make him pay? The silence was so complete Martha could hear the torches crackling, the horses breathing, her own heart pounding against her ribs. She watched Ida's face cycle through emotions like clouds across the sunshock. Fury, shame. The torchlight caught the sudden brightness in her eyes. That's not... Ida's voice faltered, cracked. This isn't about... It's always been about that. Agatha's tone softened, just a hair. I was there, Ida. I remember the whole sorry business. William was heartbroken when Rebecca said no, and you blamed Ethan instead of accepting that the girl just didn't love your boy. 20 years you've been carrying that grudge, letting it poison everything you touch. Ida's hand trembled on her reins. The torch shook, throwing wild shadows across the yard. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish pulled from water. I just wanted... She stopped. Her shoulders sagged like someone had cut the strings holding them up. I wanted someone to hurt the way my son hurt. The way I hurt watching him turn to drink because the only girl he ever loved picked someone else. The crowd shifted, uneasy. The torches seemed less threatening now. Just fire in the hands of people who suddenly looked uncomfortable with what they'd come to do. Reverend Whitfield cleared his throat, his Adam's apple bobbing. Perhaps we should reconvene in the morning. When tempers have cooled, perhaps you should go home and read your Bible. Agatha's voice cut like a blade. The part about casting stones. The part about loving thy neighbor as thyself. She looked at Ida, and something like pity crossed her weathered face. The part about forgiveness? Ida Hensley sat frozen on her horse. The torch in her hand guttered and sparked, throwing orange light across features that had crumpled like paper in the rain. Then, slowly, she lowered the flame. Her voice was barely a whisper, carried on the night breeze. I've made a fool of myself, haven't I? Nobody answered. The question hung in the smoky air like a ghost. Ida looked at Martha. Really looked. Maybe for the first time not at her body, not at her size, but at her face. At the woman standing there in a worn calico dress with dirt under her fingernails and tears drying on her cheeks. I don't know you, Ida said quietly. I never tried to know you. I just saw someone I could use. Someone who couldn't fight back. Her face twisted. That's not who I wanted to be. She turned her horse, rode back through the crowd without another word, the torch still burning in her hand. One by one. The others followed, until only Agatha Patterson remained, her gray mare stamping restless in the suddenly quiet yard. The old woman looked at Martha and Ethan standing together in the dark, their shoulders almost touching. "Well," she said, a hint of something like satisfaction in her cracked voice. "That was more excitement than I've had in 10 years. She gathered her reins. "Miss Hill, you come to the spring social Saturday next. Sit with me. Let these fools see you've got friends in this town who ain't afraid to stand up and say so." She drove off without waiting for an answer, the wagon wheels creaking into the darkness. Martha stood in the yard, watching the last torches disappear over the hill. Her legs were shaking. Her whole body was shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. She felt Ethan's hand close around hers, warm and solid and real. "It's over," he said. "Is it the worst of it?" He pulled her closer, and she let him. The rest we'll figure out together." Martha leaned into him, let herself rest against his chest, just for a moment, feeling his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I thought they were going to—" "I know. I was so scared I couldn't—" "I know." She pulled back, looked up at his face in the fading torchlight, at the lines around his eyes and the gray at his temples, and the way he was looking at her like she was something precious. "Ethan, what are we doing?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand came up, touched her cheek the way it had in her room, gentle as a prayer. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly, "but I want to find out if you'll still let me." Martha thought about Ida Hensley's crumpled face, about 20 years of grudge finally breaking open under its own weight, about Agatha Patterson driving her wagon between fire and fear because she believed it was the right thing to do. "I'll let you," she said. Ethan's face softened. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "Then come with me. To that spring social Agatha mentioned. Saturday next." Martha blinked. "The what? Spring social? At the church hall? Dancing? Punch? All that foolishness." His thumb traced her cheekbone, light as a butterfly landing. "Come with me. Let the whole town see us together." "See what? Exactly." "That I ain't ashamed of you. That I'm proud to stand beside you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That you matter to me more than what any of them think." Martha's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingertips, in the roots of her hair. "People will talk. Let them. Your reputation ain't worth a plugged nickel if I have to hide the people I care about to keep it." The word landed between them soft as snow. Care. He cared about her. "Okay," Martha heard herself say. "I'll go." Ethan's face broke into a real smile. The first full one she'd ever seen from him, crinkling the corners of his eyes, transforming his whole face. "Wear the blue dress," he said. "The one you never wore." Then he walked toward the barn to check on the horses, leaving Martha alone in the yard with her heart hammering and her hands trembling and a smile spreading across her face that she couldn't have stopped if her life depended on it. She was going to a dance with Ethan Cole in front of the whole town. Martha Hill, the fat spinster nobody would hire, was going to walk into that church hall on the arm of the most decent man in Cedar Hollow. And she was going to hold her head high while she did it. She was halfway back to the house when Jesse's voice cut through the night, high and strange. "Miss Martha, come quick. Something's happening in the garden." Martha ran. The kitchen garden was visible in the moonlight. The neat rows she'd planted with such care silvered and still. But something was different. Something was pushing up through the dark earth. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, ran her fingers along the row of tomatoes, her breath catching in her throat. Green shoots, tiny and fragile as hope itself, but unmistakably alive. Catherine's seeds, 5 years old, saved and forgotten, had finally decided to grow. And there, half buried among the new seedlings, was a piece of paper, folded and yellowed, tucked into the soil like someone had planted it there on purpose. Martha pulled it free with trembling fingers, unfolded it in the moonlight. Catherine Cole's handwriting, faded but clear as day. To whoever finds this garden again, I planted more than seeds today. I planted a prayer for the woman who will come after me. Take care of my boy. He pretends he doesn't need anyone, but he does. Be patient with him. Be kind. And know that whoever you are, you were meant to be here. Martha's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. There was one more line at the bottom, almost too faded to read. P.S. The blue dress in the back of the closet was mine. I hope it fits you. The church hall smelled of fresh-cut wildflowers and lemon polish. Martha stood in the doorway, the blue dress smooth against her skin, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. The fabric felt strange. After so many years of rough calico, soft, almost delicate, whispering against her legs when she moved. Catherine's dress. It fit like it had been made for her. Ready. Ethan's voice was low, meant only for her. No. Me neither. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. Let's go anyway. They walked in together. The hall was packed tight as a jar of preserves. Families clustered around tables laden with pies and punch and plates of fried chicken. Children chased each other between the legs of adults, their laughter bouncing off the wooden walls. A fiddler tuned his instrument in the corner, while an old man with an accordion wheezed out practice notes that sounded like a dying cat. Heads turned. Martha felt the weight of every gaze pressing against her skin. The whispers started immediate. She could see mouths moving, could imagine the words without hearing them. That's her. The one Ida tried to run out. The fat woman from the Cole ranch wearing Catherine's dress. She kept walking. Ethan guided her to a table near the wall, where Agatha Patterson sat alone, her sharp old eyes taking in everything like a hawk watching a henhouse. You came. The old woman's face creased into a smile that softened her whole expression. Good. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you're about to faint dead away. Martha sat. Her legs were trembling so bad the chair rattled against the floor. I'm fine. You're terrified out of your wits. That's different. Agatha patted her hand, her papery skin warm and dry. Give it an hour. These people got the attention span of chickens. Something else will come along to gossip about soon enough. The fiddler struck up a tune, bright and lively. Couples moved onto the floor, the women's skirts swirling like flowers in a windstorm, the men's boots thumping time against the wooden boards. Martha watched them dance. She had never learned how, had never had anyone willing to teach her, never had anywhere to go even if she'd known the steps. Martha. She looked up. Ethan stood before her, his hat in his hands. He'd worn his good shirt, the one she'd mended last week, the tiny stitches invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Dance with me? I don't know how. Neither do I. Much? He extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Reckon we can stumble through it together. The hall had gone quiet around them. Martha could feel the eyes on her, curious, skeptical, waiting to see what would happen next. She took his hand. The walk to the dance floor felt like crossing a desert. Martha's heart pounded so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Her palm was sweating against Ethan's grip. She was certain she would trip, would fall, would make a spectacle of herself in front of everyone who had ever looked at her with pity or disgust. She didn't fall. Ethan's arm came around her waist, settling there like it belonged. His other hand held hers, steady and warm. The fiddler played something slow, something simple, the notes floating through the air like dust motes in sunlight. "Just follow me," Ethan murmured against her ear. "Step where I step. Don't think about nothing else." They moved. Clumsy at first, Martha's feet tangling with his, both of them stumbling like newborn colts, but then something shifted. The rhythm caught them, carried them forward. Martha stopped thinking about the watchers and focused on the music, on Ethan's hand at her waist, on the solid warmth of his presence guiding her through steps she'd never learned. She was dancing. For the first time in 37 years of living, she was dancing. The song ended. Another began. They kept moving, turning slow circles across the worn wooden floor. Somewhere in the middle of the third song, Martha realized the whispers had stopped. People were dancing around them now, absorbed in their own partners and conversations. The spectacle had become just another couple on the floor. She was just a woman at a dance. Nothing more, nothing less. The fiddler paused to rest his arm. Martha and Ethan retreated to Agatha's table, breathless and flushed, their hands still linked together. "Not bad," the old woman said, her eyes twinkling. "For two people who claim they can't dance worth a lick." Ethan laughed. Actually laughed a sound Martha had never heard from him before, warm and rich as fresh honey. "Ida Hensley's watching you," Agatha added. Nodding toward the far corner of the hall, Martha looked. Ida stood near the punch bowl, her face pale and unreadable. When their eyes met across the crowded room, Ida looked away first. "She came to the house yesterday," Martha said quietly. "Brought a pie. Didn't say much. Just set it on the porch and left." "Apple." Agatha's eyebrow lifted. "Peach. Huh." The old woman nodded slow. "That's her mother's recipe. She don't make that for just anyone." She paused. "Might be that's as close to sorry as Ida knows how to get." The evening wore on like honey dripping slow from a spoon. People came to the table, some to speak with Agatha, some to introduce themselves to Martha with varying degrees of awkwardness. Ned Patterson brought his wife over, a nervous woman who couldn't quite meet Martha's eyes, but managed a smile that seemed genuine enough. Old Jesse showed up in a clean shirt that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in a decade, demanding to know when there'd be more of those biscuits he favored. Martha answered questions, accepted handshakes, smiled until her face ached from the effort. It was exhausting. It was wonderful. Near the end of the evening, a small woman with silver hair and clouded eyes approached their table, her steps careful and measured. "Miss Hill?" Martha looked up. The woman was ancient, even older than Agatha, her face a map of wrinkles deep as river valleys. "I'm Clara Whitfield, the Reverend's mother." She hesitated, her gnarled hands twisting together. "I wanted to say, my son was wrong, what he did that night, coming to your home with those people and their torches. It wasn't Christian. It wasn't right. Ma'am." Let me finish, child. Clara's voice trembled like a leaf in autumn wind. I lost my husband 30 years ago, raised 5 children on my own, with nothing but prayer and stubbornness. People talked about me too. Back then, said things that weren't true, things that cut deep. She reached out, took Martha's hand in her papery grip. I should have spoken up that night. Should have stopped them before they ever left town. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage. Martha's throat went tight as a drum. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. Clara nodded once, dignified as a queen, then shuffled back into the crowd. Ethan's hand found Martha's under the table, their fingers intertwining natural as breathing. You ready to go home? He asked. Home? The word settled into her chest like a warm stone on a cold night. Yes. They said their goodbyes. Agatha extracted a promise that Martha would come for tea on Tuesday. Jesse announced he'd ride back later. After he'd had more of that punch and maybe found someone foolish enough to dance with an old cowpoke. Ned Patterson shook Ethan's hand and said something about the ranch accounts being in better shape than they'd been since his father ran the store. Then they were outside, in the cool night air, the sounds of the social fading behind them like a dream dissolving at dawn. The wagon ride home was quiet. Martha leaned against Ethan's shoulder, watching the stars wheel slow overhead in the endless Colorado sky. The blue dress rustled soft against the wagon seat. Her feet ached from dancing. She had never been happier in her entire life. The ranch house appeared over the hill, dark against the moonlit sky except for the lamp Jesse had left burning in the kitchen window. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop by the barn, the horses snorting soft in the cool air. Martha. She turned, Mama. His face was half shadow, half silver light. His eyes catching the moon like deep water. I've been thinking, he said. His voice was rough, the way it got when he was trying to say something that mattered. About that back room of yours. What about it? It's too small. He climbed down from the wagon, came around to help her. His hands lingered at her waist as he lifted her down, strong and gentle. Too small for anything permanent. Martha's breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The front bedroom's bigger, Ethan continued, his voice dropping low. Room enough for 2 people who wanted to share it. A real bed instead of that rope contraption. Windows that look out over the garden your mama's seeds are growing in. The night was very quiet. Even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. Ethan Cole. Martha's voice shook despite her best efforts to steady it. Are you asking me what I think you're asking? I ain't good with fancy words. Never have been. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. But I'm asking if you'll have me, if you'll let me spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you. Martha thought about her mother's voice. No man wants to wake up to that every morning and let it blow away on the night wind like dead leaves. I've been waiting, she said, for someone to ask that question my whole life. Well, his voice cracked on the word. Now someone's asking. And now I'm saying yes. His arms came around her, pulling her close. Martha rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady as the land itself. They stood like that for a long time, in the yard of the house that had become home, under the stars their grandchildren would someday wish upon. Finally, Ethan pulled back. Want to see something? He took her hand, led her around the house to the kitchen garden, their feet crunching soft on the packed earth, The moonlight turned everything to silver and shadow. The rows of seedlings stood straight and proud tomatoes, squash, beans, all of them reaching for the sky from seeds 5 years buried, Catherine's seeds, planted in hope by a woman who had never stopped believing. Ethan knelt in the dirt. Martha knelt beside him, the blue dress spreading around her like water. "Found something else," he said quietly. "After you showed me the letter." Went back and dug a little deeper. He held out his hand. In his palm lay a simple gold band, tarnished with age but still catching the moonlight. "It was my grandmother's. Mama buried it with the seeds, and the letter." His voice was rough as tree bark. "There was a note. Said she was saving it for whoever came after. Whoever made this place a home again." Martha's vision blurred with tears. "She couldn't have known," she whispered. "Couldn't have known I would come." Maybe not. Ethan turned the ring in his fingers. But she hoped. That's what the letter said. She planted hope in this garden, same as she planted those seeds. Hoped that someday, someone would find them both. He took Martha's hand, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. "I reckon," he said. "She was hoping for you." Martha looked at the ring on her hand, at the garden growing strong around them, at this man who had seen her when nobody else would, who had asked what she could do instead of judging what she was. "I love you," she said. The words came out easy as breathing, natural as sunrise. "I don't know when it started or how it happened, but I love you. Ethan Cole, I love you too." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "Been loving you since you made those first biscuits. I think. Just took me a while to find the words." The meadowlark that lived in the fence post started its night song, silver notes floating across the moonlit garden. Martha Hill, the woman nobody would hire, the woman who had been told her whole life she wasn't enough, closed her eyes and let herself believe in something she'd given up on long ago. She was home. She was loved. And somewhere in the rich, dark earth of Catherine Cole's garden, surrounded by seeds that had finally learned to grow, hope had taken root at last. There is a certain quiet that settles after a story like this one. A heaviness in the chest that is not quite sadness, not quite joy. Something tender and familiar, like pressing your hand against an old bruise just to remember it was there. Many of us have stood where Martha stood. Perhaps not in the same doorway, not on the same dusty road, but in that same familiar place of waiting to be seen, of carrying ourselves carefully through rooms where we felt too large, too old, too much, too different, of learning to expect the closed door before we even reached for the handle. Some of us are still standing there. It is all right if this story stirred something that did not settle back down. Some feelings are meant to be carried a while longer, not understood or explained away. Some seeds take years to push through the soil. Some doors open when we have stopped knocking. You do not need to do anything with what you are feeling. You are allowed to simply let it rest beside you, quiet and unresolved. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.